Our overall theme, again, at Zeitgeist is the way that new tools have allowed people to collaborate and connect in new forms with new opportunities and new challenges. When it comes to the ways in which new media affect new marketing, we're going to begin with a discussion of the art of the social start, and a panel on what's made this whole industry to go, that is, the startup. We have people who could not be more expert in this subject for having participated in themselves. Our moderator, Esther Dyson, has been a friend of mine for now nearly 40 years, from the time when I was a teenager and she was not yet born. She has inspired startups around the world through her adventure conferences and newsletter. She is one of her recent ventures is one of my personal favorites, Flight School. She knows this subject very well, and she'll lead our discussion. We're going to hear from Chris Alden, the CEO and chairman of Six Apart, formerly co-founder and CEO of Roho Networks and former CEO of Red Herring Communications. Michael Birch, CEO of Bebo and of 6 consumer websites over the last decade, and Reid Hoffman, the chairman and president of LinkedIn, which now has 9 million members, and before that, executive vice president of PayPal. Please join me in welcoming Esther Dyson and her panel.
Great. Good morning, everybody. Did anyone figure out the algorithm by which they assigned seats at dinner last night? The secret Google algorithm? What we're going to do on this panel, we're not quite as quick talking as Jim Fallows. We have 30 minutes, which is way too small. We are in the lucky position of having been a non-described panel, so we're going to pretty much do what we want. It's called The Art of the Social Start. And to some extent, I think our thesis, or what emerges, is going to be that this particular video you just saw is probably more suitable for the panel you're going to see after us, which is the marketing people. We're going to set it up. But to some extent, if you look at what happened on the web, in the beginning, there was nothing. Then there was a lot of content created by institutions. And now these startups are taking back the power, both as startups and as the people whom they collect into their social networks. We're going to be sort of down and dirty. We're the techies or the geeks, as opposed to the visionaries you heard yesterday or the marketers you're going to hear later. So we're going to talk a little bit about how these things actually work, and then the kind of subtle impacts they're going to have on people, whether they're consumers or social entrepreneurs or financial entrepreneurs or anything else. There are 3 major points that I want to raise. We're going to talk about a couple of them. We're also going to have audience questions, and we're going to do all that in 30 minutes. So the first is simply, what is an entrepreneur? That actually changes in a world of social networks. The internet made it cheaper to do a lot of things. Social networks even make it cheaper to find an audience. Probably the biggest thing Facebook brings is not just a platform technically, but also a platform of users ready-made to spark a group of users for any new app that shows up. Most of these apps so far haven't been terribly rich or exciting, but they spread very, very quickly. There's also kind of a shift. Marketers talk about attention, and they see that as intention to buy. But there's also the kind of attention that only a person can pay to another person, and that, to some extent, is the currency of these social networks. How that, it's not rational or irrational, it's just something different, and it's very, very strong. I don't think it's fully understood, but if commercial energy made the internet go, attention energy is what makes social networks go. Second issue we want to talk about briefly is the flexing from a platform that's technical to a community as a platform, and then this notion of a user controlling his own identity and creating a distributed identity or a distributed presence across platforms. And then finally, there's I think, a sea change in how people see themselves online. From the point of view of a marketer, many people have been visible through cookies, through registration. Their identity has been collected from outside. On social networks, people establish their own identities, they establish their own presence. They're beginning to learn how to control that. It's not just a technical learning, it's also kind of a social or emotional learning. They feel that they can control their identity, they can decide who sees it, who doesn't. They're doing that now explicitly vis-a-vis other people. I think in the future they'll also be doing that explicitly vis-a-vis marketers. So let me begin and ask Reid. I don't know you for 40 years, but for a while. Each of these guys is just going to give you a little précis of what he does, what his platform does, whatever.
So my name is Reid Hoffman, Chairman and President of Products at LinkedIn. LinkedIn is professional networking versus social networking. Basic idea is to make every individual professional effective at finding the right people and the right answers to solve the professional problems day by day. I also do some angel investing, and I'm on a few of the kind of new media Web 2.0 boards. One
of the interesting things about LinkedIn is you're not just about presence. You actually help people manage transactions. You take what the best networker here in this room does automatically in terms of introducing people to one another, remembering his contacts, and you make it easy for the rest of us.
Yes. The basic idea is, I mean, part of the view of the future that the internet is bringing is that everyone will have a professional presence online, and then how do you essentially manage that in terms of finding the right people and getting to them? Because even though, I mean, a lot of people in this room are quite, senior established people with networks, careers, et cetera, finding the right expert to help you, finding references on people you're hiring, all that sort of thing. It's the sort of thing that you do when you pick up the phone and you say, let me call someone and ask them that. Well, use search instead of, not to replace the phone, but as the prelude to potentially picking up the phone.
Yeah, the other thing, it not only helps you get favors, it helps you do favors. So it helps you create that social capital that you can then leverage for whatever it is you want.
Yeah, exactly.
Michael from Bebo.
Yeah, my name is Michael Birch, and I somehow always seem to end up on the entrepreneurs panel. And I've always wondered what an entrepreneur really is, and I think I finally worked out that it's people who wear blue jeans on panels.
We dressed up, actually.
Yeah, I actually put a shirt on, which is, for me, a miracle. So I'm the founder and CEO of Bebo.com, which is a very late entry into the social networking space. We started about 2 years after MySpace and over a year after Facebook. It's actually in the short, brief history of social networking, which, as we know it today, started in 2003. This is my second social network. The first one was Ringo.com, which we sold 6 months after we started. At the time, it was the second biggest next to Friendster, which was that enviable position that was a king of social networking at the time. And so Bebo was a very late entry, and everyone thought we were crazy for doing another social network because everyone thought that social networking was wrapped up by then. And we had to come from nowhere to somewhere. And last month, Comscore measured us as the largest single site in the UK, measured by page views, the largest in Ireland by page views. So we actually passed Google out, esteemed host. And in the UK, we're third largest behind, obviously, MySpace and Facebook. So we have some extreme challenges ahead. We've come a long way so far, but we still have a very long way to go.
And just mention where you are geographically.
Geographically, I'm from England, and we're large in England, and I started it in San Francisco. So.
And explain why, or how. I mean,
why
one of these mysteries is how different social networks seem to flourish in certain places and not in others.
Well, we consciously decided, where do we want to be successful? And so we chose the 6 English language markets that we felt mattered, which was the US, Canada, Ireland, the UK, New Zealand, and Australia. And 98% of our page views are in those markets today. And then we would actually do things to deter traffic from other places. We'd turn off certain features by IP addresses. So we thought it's important to succeed where we want to succeed. And the problem sometimes is if you succeed in a market which is culturally very different to other markets, the network becomes dominated by people from that market, and then it feels a very alien environment when people from the US or the UK come to the network. So we felt it was important to kind of control that growth.
Right, at least for now.
At least for now, yeah.
I mean, someday China may be your biggest market.
China, yeah, we've consciously kept out of China and probably will for the foreseeable future. Because again, culture is so different, and then you're competing with homegrown networks, which we don't think that we're necessarily able to do. So we're not sure whether it's worth focusing too strongly on that.
So, Chris, you have quite a presence in China. That wasn't your main point, but it's still interesting. And
Yeah. Well, I'm Chris Alden, Chairman and CEO of Six Apart, and we're the big blogging company. We've got about 20 million bloggers worldwide that we serve, and they in turn reach an audience of anywhere between 50 and 100 million, depending how you count it. It's actually a tough number to count. We're big worldwide. We're actually huge in Japan, for example. And we do have a lot of Chinese bloggers. The #1 English language blogger, for example, in China has been blogging on Movable Type. We have 4 products I should mention: Movable Type, TypePad, LiveJournal, and Box. So people might know us better from our brand names and the company name. And and so he's been blogging, as of a lot of people in China, using on our platform. And I look at those 20 million bloggers, and I try to think of all of them as social startups in and of their own right. And they're not all trying to be a Facebook or a Google or a LinkedIn or a Bebo, but they've dedicated, in many cases, a lot of their lives and their passions, and it's a big component of who they are. And some people are making nice businesses, actually, in sort of a micro way. And so that reflects certainly how I think of entrepreneurialism and the services that we provide. It taps into what had been talked about yesterday about the humanity of humans and this need for self-expression. That's obviously something that we take great pride in helping to support.
And how do your 4 different services operate as platforms for entrepreneurs? And now you guys can come in, and we're in the discussion part, and then pretty soon we'll do the audience part.
Yeah, so our 4 platforms are kind of geared towards different types of segments. So for example, Movable Type is used by a lot of large organizations, large publishers, but also earlier more startup publishers. So for example, I saw Ariana Huffington around here. She's their site is powered at least in part by Movable Type. TypePad powers a lot of. There's a lot of incredible blogs. You may not know, Celebrity Babies, but just these sites, Celebrity Babies, millions and millions of people visit these sites, and it's really compelling. LiveJournal is a site that has got 14 million people registered worldwide. And again, people have spent significant, it's in some ways I think of it as the social oxygen for a lot of these people. And we not only, of course, allow the tools for people to create and to build communities, but also increasingly allowing advertisers and marketers to reach that and trying to work on all sides of that cycle.
And that, of course, enables people to support themselves by blogging.
Yep.
Or at least supplement their incomes.
And in some cases, it support themselves 100% by blogging, but in a lot of cases, the people who have a business and the blogging or their website component is becoming an increasingly important part of it. May not be 100% of your revenues, but we have a lot of small, medium businesses selling wine or glassware or beans. And
beans?
Beans. We have a great company on TypePad called Gordo Beans. He sells beans used to make chili, and had a pretty plain, boring website. But then he started blogging about recipes, and I got a lot more love from other bloggers and a lot more love from Google search engine, and quadrupled the sales, and a lot of those anecdotes.
So whereas Six Apart and Movable Type and TypePad are kind of media platforms by which you can publish yourself as a business, LinkedIn, I think, we haven't actually studied this yet, but I think we're used by just about every Series A entrepreneur that pitches VCs in the Valley, and probably most other places, because the entrepreneurial gig is purely you need to constantly be reaching out to people. You need to reach out to investors, you need to reach out to potential customers, advisors in the market, experts, employees, co-founders, right, the whole set. And so LinkedIn provides you a way of reaching those people. And then also in terms of the answer service, which we launched early this year, finding out kind of answers to questions which entrepreneurs always have, because part of the way that I describe the entrepreneurial venture usually is you jump off a cliff and you assemble an airplane on the way down, and you hope that you have all the pieces. Financing is just a thermal draft up, otherwise no particular success.
But how does the existence of all these social networks even change what it means to be an entrepreneur? Michael, that's especially for you.
Yeah, I think the most interesting change, and it's primarily happened in the last 1 or 2 years, is that for an entrepreneur now, it used to be, certainly in the internet space, about starting a .com. And now it's not so much about starting a .com. You can start a widget or an app, and you can feed off someone else's network. So whereas it used to be, how do I reach critical mass? How do I build a network of people on my site? There's certain host sites such as Bebo and Facebook and MySpace where you can develop an application or a widget and deploy it upon all these networks at once and reach critical mass far more quickly than you used to in the past. I mean, in the past, to reach 1 million users of any product on the internet was a phenomenal achievement. And now you can do that in a matter of weeks. So I think there's been a big shift from starting .coms to starting applications that work off the back of other networks that are pre-existing.
Yeah, but what also intrigues me is that it used to be if you wanted to be an entrepreneur, you needed to be someone who wanted money in the end because that was the fuel.
Right.
Now you can be an environmental entrepreneur and you never get rich, but you may get powerful. So there's again, it's this attention. You don't agree?
Well, no, I mean, I don't think that the primary motivation for a lot of entrepreneurs, and certainly some of the more successful ones, was about money. I think
No, but they needed money to get there.
Sure. Well, they needed to do something that people would buy. I mean, we started magazine Red Herring. We didn't raise any money. The way we got money was just, selling ads and subscriptions. But so sure, you need money. But the thing that drove us, I mean, was an indefatigable passion for whatever, that's what drives a lot of entrepreneurs, whatever they're, passionate about. And yet there's certain hurdles, certain barriers. And for us, starting a magazine 15 years ago, whatever, the desktop publishing revolution really helped us and made our economics much more attractive and feasible to do something. And of course, blogging and other tools have made it so that the economics of publishing are now, close to nothing. And I think you're going to see that too when you talk about, more social startups. It's not the economics of that are going down to the floor, and that's going to foster, I think, a whole new breed of innovative startups that, again, are not going to try to be the next Google, but are going to try to do something much more, micro and something that we're really passionate about.
So it makes it easier to be sustainable without necessarily being hugely profitable. But at the same time, the whole world becomes much more fluid. It's easier for someone else to start up and compete with you, as Friendster discovered. Are we going to see consolidation or continued moving long tail, or how's this thing going to sort itself out?
I think the barriers to entry for becoming an entrepreneur and starting a business are lower probably than they have been since the kind of original Californian gold rush in many ways, where all you needed was to stand next to a hole in the ground and be a liar, and you were suddenly a prospector. And now all you literally need is a computer and a lot of time on your hands. And I mean, that's certainly how I started out in 99 when I started doing this in the UK. I was previously working in an insurance company, which is probably the least entrepreneurial environment you could ever be in. And luckily, some clever person invented the internet, and suddenly I had an escape route from that. And I literally spent a lot of time with a computer at home, programming, trying to build a business. And my goal was to make as much money as I used to working for someone else. I didn't have any ambitions to be the next Google or the next Yahoo or anything else. It was just about get to that point, and then I can devote my life to doing what I enjoy, doing what I love doing, and trying to build something even better. And it's a lot of work to reach that point, but I think now it's even easier to do that because so many of these, I mean, there's tens of thousands of apps and widget developers now, and 99% of them are one guy in his bedroom or his dorm room and developing a business and trying to get to that point.
So now that you kind of got over that point, what do you want to do?
I mean, the ironic thing is that your goal is to get to that point where you make as much money as you used to, and it took me 3 years to achieve that, and I was pretty much down to zero bank balance at that point. But then when you reach it, you suddenly go far past it, and then your kind of outlook on life changes, I guess. And I mean, now we're just trying to build Bebo to be as successful as it can. I think it's very different than what I set out to do. But I think most entrepreneurs don't set out to necessarily do what they end up doing.
So suddenly your personal motivation takes second place to some kind of corporate motivation. You have investors or...
Yeah, I mean, whereas you start out and the only person you answer to is yourself, suddenly you're answering to your employees, to people below you, to people above you, and so on.
Your customers.
To the customers, and your freedom in a way disappears. You're never freer than you are when you're just you and a computer in a bedroom.
Okay, we're ready for questions. Come on up to the mic, but I want to... Jim's been trying to turn this into a conference about China. Which I think will prove to be prescient. You were talking earlier in the green room about what's going on in China.
Who's the largest English language blogger in China. And I met him 3 or 4 years ago. He's been blogging now for 5 years. And, you know, I asked him, do you ever blog about politics? And he says, no, I don't blog about politics, and neither does, you know, there's just not a lot of political blogging in China. And it wasn't being anti-political, it was really being apolitical. He was talking about travel and food. And I met him recently. He came into our offices. He was celebrating his 5th anniversary. And in that interim period, the Chinese government had forced a lot of bloggers to register. And by his estimates, they actually shut down about a million websites, a million blogs.
Out of how many?
I don't know that number. I mean, that's probably a pretty large percentage, though. I don't know how many. It's probably an uncounted number, but millions of blogs in China certainly. And so then I asked him, "Are you blogging about politics now?" And he says, "Yes, I'm blogging about politics, and so are a lot of other people." And it was because it was a specific reaction to the government cracking down on them that actually activated a lot of them. And so now he's writing about the one-child policy and what's going on in Burma and why they can't get information about it in China. And there's a big battle waging right now, and the government's shutting down now not just blogs but entire data centers. But it's obviously fascinating to see that, and that's what we love about it. Obviously, enabling people to be passionate and let their passions take them where they'll.
So has he heard from any authorities himself?
Well, he's nervous about it. Because again he's been English language and focuses mostly on things like travel and entertainment. They haven't gone after him, but I wouldn't be surprised, unfortunately, if I heard in the next 6 months that he was taken offline. So a lot of what they're doing is finding offshore ISPs and then trying to break through the Great Firewall.
Yeah. Okay, I'll keep asking questions.
Well, actually, I'll answer the one while we're waiting for this. In terms of, I think, the way that social networking and Web 2.0 will change the general landscape, is I think there will both be consolidation and a long tail. And I think it will tend to be some mega properties, which are the kind of unifying, meeting this particular human need across a wide set.
The platforms.
The platforms, et cetera. And then a bunch of very small, specific stuff that tends to be probably more shoestring, more idiosyncratic for that. And I think you're going to, the answer is actually not one or the other, but is actually both. From a venture industry standpoint, the challenge is all the really long tail stuff is not actually going to be kind of tech economics for them. So they're trying to figure out which of the ones that are going to be kind of the big in the platforms. And one of the things I think is going to be interesting that comes out of now it's so easy to construct this stuff is it's just a further elaboration of what's already been happening on the internet. So bloggers, et cetera, have equal voices and can compete with media institutions on the web. Well, now you actually have, 2 kids in a college dorm room can construct an app that can get to millions of people, and leverage and do that. And that's going to create a really wide variety of interesting things ultimately. Now, the flip side challenge of that is as all that increases, the noise increases. Right, so breaking through the noise in order to accomplish anything significant, I think it's harder, which is one of the reasons I think it tends to be, not a long curve that kind of goes like this, but kind of more like that. Right. So anyway, answer to your earlier question.
Yeah, but there's this tension between, again, there's the platform, then there are the communities on the platform, or a community of one blog and its community, or 5 blogs that link to each other a lot. And then there's the emergence of the empowered user with OpenID, so I can take, you're involved with Facebook as an investor, even though can you take your Facebook social graph and use it somewhere else? Traditionally, platforms have tried to be roach motels, as you can imagine, but that may not last.
Well, there's a sense in which, by having opened up the platform, there's an ability to leverage that platform in other domains.
Right.
You know, one of the things that the whole question of taking your platform and using it somewhere else is, you know, will you allow yourself to get integrated into other places? And I think some of the networks will do that, and I think some of the networks will try to be portals or destinations. And you know, I can't speak officially for Facebook at the moment. It's more like a portal, and I think ones that focus more on utility and transaction, like LinkedIn, will be more, you know, deliberately where you're doing your business and integrate there. Because I think it comes down to a question of what you're trying to do. Now, generally speaking, a lot of the internet has been about entertainment, and there's a natural alignment of that to a portal, because media strategy is more time on my site, more page views on my site is more economics, and, you know, so keep the person here.
Whereas if you're doing transactions, you get paid for the service, and
exactly,
you want to make them more effective one way or another.
I think if you look at the all these social networks, you know, LiveJournal, Bebo, LinkedIn, Facebook, certainly MySpace, you can think of them as countries with their own borders and boundaries and the travel restrictions, you know, back and forth. But I think you're going to see a lot more, if you will, free trade.
And teleportation.
And teleportation, certainly. But you're going to see people going towards their comparative advantage, and I think you'll see some enlightened people thinking about their enlightened self-interest in terms of opening up, and maybe there'll be sort of a NAFTA among the social network groups that will open that up. I think that inevitably things are going to move that way. Now, whether individual players are going to want to move as quickly for whatever reasons, you're going to have a lot of those types of countervailing interests, but I do think that's where it will all tend to go.
I think social networks at the moment, they're proprietary and open at the same time. So they're trying to open up to allow third-party developers to come into the network, develop,
add value,
create a genuine business off the back of the network. But at the same time, they're very closed and protective about their social graph, because that's where they see the lock-in and the value. And although they're open, they're not providing tools where you can take your network from MySpace and shift it to Bebo or Facebook or in any other direction. And so it's kind of doing both at the same time. I'm just hope that there's certain parallels to the kind of operating systems of Mac, Linux, and Windows. And what I do hope is that in terms of the third-party developers, we don't end up with a problem where you have to redevelop your application on each of these networks. And instead, these applications can just exist on all the networks at once, and the industry comes up with a common standard, a common API, so we don't end up with totally different networks. There is some commonality between them.
Right, and of course every network wants to be unique and have the value added for his network and not
right, but it's not in the interest of the greater community,
right,
of the businesses trying to develop businesses off the back of networks.
Precisely, so there's this tension. And then there's the third tension. I've seen 3 or 4 different companies who are going direct to users and saying, we will help you instantiate yourself on these 4 or 5 different networks. Just as, to some extent, Susan was talking yesterday about genes, and you want to spread your genes as widely as you can. Now you want to spread your presence as widely as you can, whether it's on Twitter or...
So wherever there's a genuine need, there's always a company trying to satisfy that need, and there's companies trying to say, we'll manage your presence on all these different networks at once. So that's more of a shout out to the need of communication between them.
But I actually never think that, is there a meta like network aggregating all these? As I tend to think that that'll never work, because each of these solves a particular need and gets close to psychology, and the need for managing my multiple networks is kind of the digerati, oh look, I spend 5 hours online and do that. So I think it tends to dive much more into a kind of a class of, I always think of these things in terms of human psychology, like what's the class of need here? For example, you know, as a sort of as a wake up, one of the things I frequently say when I say in investing in the consumer internet, you're investing in at least one of the 7 deadly sins, because you know the 7 deadly sins have to do with deep human psychological kind of reflexes, and if you get those things in breadth, then that's one of the things that you know, a lot of humans share. So, for example, the self-expression tends to tie to vanity, right? It's like tends to tie to I want to make myself look good, et cetera, et cetera. And there's, you know, those. I think you can kind of typify most of the the big networks and do that. Now it's a crude metric.
Yeah. You could also say, though, I mean, vanity, people want to have impact. They want to, again, they want attention. I'm not sure what that is. But I still think that 5 years, this whole notion of multitasking, which is now very well known, there's also something, call it multi-personality. 10 years ago, everybody had one email address. Now, most people have 5 or 6. And I think people are going to get better at having multiple social networks. But just as you don't want to check all your 5 email accounts, you want to have an email account aggregator, you want a personality aggregator, and then this sounds like a lot of work, but 5 years from now, the kids will know how to do it. And
yeah, I think that's absolutely the case. People have been cultivating their online personas more, and some people have a persona of commenting on this blog about politics, and then the next hour they can comment on this blog on technology. And that's how they can, and those are different identities, and they may not want those identities to cross over, but they may want to nurture those identities even more richly on each of those sites.